Hi everyone, welcome to this Q&A, and there is a great pleasure to welcome here in this hall Nicolas Elliott, the selectioner of Locarno Film Festival, the special correspondent in New York for Cahiers du Cinema, and the member of the jury for the national competition here in Odessa Film Festival. Please, warm round of applause like that. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna start with my questions, and I think like every filmmaker, they don't have a privilege, to start from the beginning, the shooting. But I'd like to know before talking about like a legendary publication like Cahiers du Cinema or Locarno Film Festival, that's very special. How did you get into movies? How did you get into films? How did it become your profession?
First of all, hello. Thank you all for being here. It's nice to see you. I got into movies simply by going to the movies, in the most banal way possible. My parents were film lovers, and when I was a teenager, I didn't want to do anything that my parents did. And every Friday they would say, "Hey, do you want to go to the movies?" And I would say no.
Sure.
And then one day when I was 15 or 16, I just said yes. And I really liked it. And I just started going to the movies a lot. I started reading about movies. I actually started reading Cahiers du Cinéma very young. And it started to shape my way of looking not only at cinema, not only at art, but also philosophy, politics. It opened doors to the rest of the world through seeing films from all over the world. And just through going to the movies, I met people who loved movies as much as I did, and eventually that led to professional opportunities. I've been very lucky in the way things kind of followed one after another in a very organic manner.
What were your first biggest impressions? You went to the movies, you watched what? Or maybe like 6 times or 7 times?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the very first movie, I mean, I had seen movies before, but just like in a very, you go with a group of teenage friends and you kiss during the movie and all that stuff. I wasn't looking at the screen so much. When I went with my parents, it was a really not that interesting movie called Sea of Love with Al Pacino.
Right.
But somehow, I don't know, I got into being in another story. And then the movies that really were important to me early on were mostly French movies. I was living in Luxembourg at the time, and so we had good distribution of French movies, and it was 1991, and so there was Léos Carax's movie Les Amants du Pont-Neuf, Lovers on the Bridge, which to this day is very important to me, and it had a huge impact as a work of art, and also it kind of, Carax has a little bit of a kind of rock and roll punkish legend to him, so it kind of intersected perfectly with who I was as a 16-year-old. And then eventually Godard, I saw Le Mépris, Contempt, and I think that really changed my understanding of what it is to make a film, what it is to think about a film, what it is you can do with film.
So, is this how you got into Cahiers du Cinéma? Because, loving Godard and then, becoming a part of the team and becoming a correspondent. So, how did this happen?
I mean, it's really just, honestly, good luck, passion for film, and also, in my case, loyalty to friendship. And so what I mean by that is that I went to university in the United States, and I actually studied theater because I had a background as a teenager as an actor, so I felt like continuing with that. But then I moved to Paris, and I started doing what young people who love movies do in Paris, which is going to the Cinémathèque and blah, blah, blah. And in Paris, I met a young French critic who was just starting to write for Cahiers du Cinéma, Stéphane Delorme. We became friends, and then I moved to New York, and I was in New York for like 5, 6, 7 years, and Stéphane became editor-in-chief of Cahiers, and we had always remained friends. Whenever I would go to Paris, we would meet, and we would talk in an animated manner about, what movie's good, what movie's bad, blah, blah, blah. And when he became editor, right away, he told me, if I get this job, I want you to be part of the team. And we had never talked about it. I'm a writer, so it wasn't that crazy that he would ask me, but it was never something I thought about. And so he got the job. He asked me to write about a specific movie that was playing in New York. I did it.
Which one?
It was Moon by Duncan Jones,
Okay.
his first film,
Right,
David
right.
Bowie's son.
Right,
and that
right.
movie was never released in France, so that's why he asked me to see it. And it's a really interesting movie, actually. So I was able to write about it, and that became this job. I should also mention, though, I make it sound like it's also easy. When I was very young, when I was 20, I did an internship at Cahiers du Cinéma through
Okay.
my university. They had a program of internships. So I,
Were they cruel to you? You know, like the snobbish French critics, you know, like making you do things you never wanted to do, like going for some errands.
no, they weren't cruel to me at all, but I was cruel to myself. You know, I showed up at Cahiers du Cinéma on January 3rd or 2nd, 1995. Or 1994. I was 20 years old. I was, you know, coming from an American background. Cahiers du Cinéma seemed like a godlike creation and endeavor to me, and I was just terrified. I mean, when I think back about what it was like to sit in the entry hall of Cahiers du Cinéma at that time, with my hair looking really stupid, I think I had a backward baseball cap on. It was just terrible.
Like,
It's
you know,
very
true
uncomfortable
American,
to think.
True American.
It was maybe my truest moment of Americanism by contrast with where I was. And I'm just very glad I don't ever have to go back to that moment. But they were really nice to me. I was very, very shy. I mean, sometimes they would invite me for lunch and I would say, no, I have to do something, or like I have to go to the dentist. And I would just like eat a sandwich on the sidewalk because I was too shy to eat with them. But when I was with them, they were actually generous, and you know, the truth is there's a tradition of people at Cahiers du Cinéma being very young when they write there. So a lot of the people were like 4 or 5 years older than me, but they seemed like giants to me because it seemed like such an incredibly hard thing to write, I don't know, 5,000 words about a film in Cahiers du Cinéma at that time.
And how did it change through time? Because, of course, we know Cahiers du Cinéma is this, you know, cradle of the Nouvelle Vague filmmakers like Godard, like Truffaut, and film critics becoming filmmakers. So what's the atmosphere right now there? I mean, because we take here, like in Ukraine, we would think of Cahiers du Cinéma as kind of a snobbish. And I told you before we met, you think of, you know, French critics in beret, you know, like being with, thinking about high matters. So how does it work really in reality?
Well, first, just as a point of fact, I would say that French snobs and intellectuals probably don't wear berets.
Okay.
And they probably don't walk around with baguettes under their arm. They probably, like everybody else, are just doing this now.
Okay.
I would argue that you can interpret the Cahiers du Cinéma way of thinking and writing as snobbish. I understand that, why you would say that, but my experience of Cahiers du Cinéma as part of the team now for 10 years is one of intellectual rigor, which is different than snobbery, allied with great generosity. I feel, especially coming from our editor-in-chief, Stéphane Delorme, I feel more than anything else a real desire, you know, we're all in our 40s, a real desire to reach out to the next generation, to have an open conversation based on where we're coming from, but also feeding on their enthusiasm and their way of looking at moving images, and more than anything, to try to inspire anyone to make films that are at the level that we dream of and that we hope for. So rather than snobbery, I want to argue that there's a really high standard because there's a real desire to have great cinema art that can, in a really idealized and hopelessly utopian way, transform society.
What are your duties in Cahiers du Cinéma now? What I never knew they had the American correspondent, New York correspondent. Yeah. So what do you do there? I mean,
so the fact of the matter is that I'm the New York correspondent because I live in New York, and they didn't send me there. I was living in New York when I was asked to start writing for Cahiers, and if I wasn't living in New York, if I was living in Manila, I would be the correspondent in Manila, or if I was living in Paris, I would just be another one of the guys or girls in Paris. Initially, when I started writing for Cahiers, because I was new, I did focus a lot on American independent cinema, and a lot of my work was more journalistic. talking about, you know, who the young filmmakers are, what the festivals are in the United States, questions of production and distribution. But with time, especially once I started attending the European festivals with Kaye, like going to Cannes and going to Locarno, I really became just another member of the team, which is simply to say that if I've seen films from anywhere in the world on the same schedule as French distribution, like if I love a Tsai Ming-liang film and I want to write about it, I'll write the review. So I have like a little bit of an American expertise bias, and certain times they'll ask me to write about specific topics because an American point of view is important. Like we've covered questions of race in especially American cinema recently, so it's obviously very important to have an American point of view. But the rest of the time, I'm just another guy. I just want to say one thing that makes me really proud is that a couple of times I interviewed Abel Ferrara, and whenever I would introduce myself to him and say, hey, remember me, I'm the New York correspondent of Kaiju Cinema, he would really make fun of me. He thinks that the title New York correspondent is like an Alfred Hitchcock thing or something, like really old school, really silly, and he really enjoys it. So that's something that makes me happy.
Oh, that's cool. So, do you follow American independent cinema? I mean, like we have lots of names. We have like Sean Baker, like Ryan Coogler, but he's not independent now because he made Black Panther. I don't think he's gonna be back to his independent roots. We don't know about that.
Probably
like Safdie brothers. So, who do you think are the most exciting guys or girls out there making independent films?
Well, I really love the Safdie brothers that you just mentioned. I mean, I'll start with your macro question, and then I'll go micro. I of course follow American independent cinema, but there's a lot of American independent cinema that I'm not really interested in. Like I so far have never had to go to Sundance, and I'm really happy about it. I suspect that now that I work for Locarno, I will have to go, and I'm not that excited about it because my idea of the typical Sundance product, and I'm using the word product intentionally rather than the word film, is something that I really don't go for in cinema. I think that actually there's now something in independent cinema that is just as formatted as a Hollywood product. It's just, you know, maybe a little less expensive and has another focus, but it's just as unsurprising, just as calculated to me, and so I'm not interested in that.
Formula, right?
Yeah, formula. What I'm interested in, whether it's American independent cinema, Hollywood cinema, Ukrainian cinema, French studio cinema, whatever, is something that's taking me someplace that I don't expect. That's all I want. Well, there's more than that I want, but if I'm sitting in front of a screen and I have no idea where I'm going, or if I am really surprised, wow, I love that. So
and getting back to American independent cinema, right? So yeah.
So the Safdie brothers are great, and it's kind of like they're like my hometown heroes, you know, because they are New Yorkers. I'm a New Yorker. Kaye du Cinema supported them very early, so one of my first important interviews with Kaye was for a special issue of DIY New York Cinema, where we interviewed the Safdies at great length, and it's just been incredible to see the way that these two brothers, who started making films so young, you know, in their early 20s, have grown. They're making bigger and bigger films with real bona fide movie stars, and yet they still manage to keep that eccentricity, that New York flavor, that intensity. I think they're great film artists, and I think they're at that ultimate level where they're providing something that's truly entertaining, like you just have a good time, like when you would watch an Alfred Hitchcock movie, but at the same time, like when you would watch an Alfred Hitchcock movie, you're really digging into the deep, uncomfortable, moving, funny stuff of being human.
And there is actually a film called Good Time, the good one.
Yes, I mean, it does provide a good time, though it's incredibly dark and disturbing.
Yeah, really. And another thing, the next film they're making is for Netflix. And what do you think? Is it a good thing that you know, the streaming services, they, you know, give the backing to independent filmmakers, or do they just spoil them? Because if they go through all this, you know, studio system, then maybe the project becomes better. We don't know that. But now they get, this is this is considered to be the easy money. So what do you think? Does it spoil independence, or is it a good thing?
I think real artists will always be real artists. I mean, the studio system in Hollywood in the golden age, from the 30s to the 50s, a lot of people, and especially women, were abused by that system, but incredible films were made. I mean, I keep mentioning Hitchcock, but John Ford, Howard Hawks, Ernst Lubitsch, Raoul Walsh, the list goes on and on. So there's something to be said for providing artists with the means to achieve their vision. Maybe part of the Sundance problem is that if filmmakers don't have a lot of money, they're always going to come back to these simple things like, oh, where can I film for not a lot of money? I'm going to borrow my grandmother's house and I'm going to make a movie about a bunch of people coming together for Thanksgiving, and they're going to argue, but at the end you'll find that they all love each other. Like, frankly, I've seen enough of those movies. So I like the idea that independent filmmakers are given the means to have wild visions. Like someone like David Lynch. I mean, he's not working with Netflix, but he did make Twin Peaks: The Return, which is a TV series.
And it's insane.
It's an absolute masterpiece of our era.
Right.
These people need the means to do more than movies of just two people talking about love in a cafe, which I also really like. But I think that Netflix, Amazon, HBO, whatever, they don't have to spoil the artist, but they can spoil the artist because, the more money you make, the more your life and everything around you is expensive, and you start to, I think it's an addiction it's hard to downsize, right? Like, it's very rare in the history of cinema, though it exists. Gus Van Sant goes back and forth between studios and incredibly experimental small-scale projects. But in general, the career track that people dream of is bigger, 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 bigger. And so that can be a problem. If you start to think like, I have to keep getting bigger, I have to get more and more money, and then you start to make compromises. But if you can stay true to your original artistic instinct, then, it's hard to argue against artists being paid, artists having the means to realize their visions, and a lot of people being able to see the movies. Because, of course, one of the huge problems of cinema today is distribution. And I'm very sad that in our lifetimes we probably will start seeing very few movies up here. But if we want movies to exist, I think we also kind of have to embrace this streaming era. Which, last thing on that, before you ask another question, it's a very interesting time because it's the Wild West of the streaming era, right? They're still figuring it out. They have all this power, they have all this money, and so they're jumping on everybody and everything. So you're getting really experimental stuff, and then you're getting like very formulaic stuff. I suspect that the way most industry goes, eventually it will close down and we'll have more of the formulaic stuff. So this is a very interesting moment. Maybe the independents will wind up back out in the cold sooner rather than later, and will again be making very small scale projects that will be wild and hard to see.
And talking about the spoiling of the artist, we should see how the Ryan Coogler career goes, because he got so big, and now we will see what happens next to him. And being a critic, I mean, there is a lot of talk nowadays that critics become not unreliable, but the industry says that the critics does not influence anything. I mean that if the critics say that this is bullshit, this blockbuster is shit, and you shouldn't go see it, it does not affect the box office. And what do you think? What's the role of the film critic right now? What does he do? What's his job now?
So it's so interesting, this question, because yes, on the one hand, people tend to shrug off film critics. They're less and less significant nowadays because we have these aggregators like Rotten Tomatoes, and we have social media, so who cares about critics? But on the other hand, there's a huge movement, especially in the United States, to have the diversity of the population represented in the critics. Like, there was an editorial in the New York Times just last week about efforts and the need for having more female critics, more critics of color, et cetera, et cetera. And there are Hollywood stars who who are voicing these concerns. You know, like an actress like Brie Larson, or I think also the actress Tessa Thompson, have really stepped forward to argue for this. And of course, I think that diversity in the critical body should exist, and it's uncomfortable for me sometimes when I'm on the train to Cannes with my fellow colleagues from
And they are all
Cinema.
male critics, right?
We're all male white critics. Now that's changing. We have some really great young female critics as well. But anyhow, I think that's great. On the other hand, what's weird about that is that, for instance, I think it was Brie Larson who was talking about some movie that got bad reviews, and she said, if you're a 45-year-old straight white male, this movie isn't for you. And so there's this new argument that some movies aren't for certain critics, which, you know, goes out to some movies aren't for certain people. And to me, that's the absolute antithesis of what film going, and by extension being a film critic, is, which is I got into film just like I got into literature because I wanted to know what the experience of being alive was like for other people, and ideally for people who aren't me, who are different than me, especially like a woman. Of course I want to know what it's like to be a woman. So it's very complicated about criticism right now. You know, on the one hand, it's like we're supposedly less powerful than ever before, and I think that's true. But on the other, there is pressure and there's focus on it. The other thing I would say in response to your question is that I come at criticism from a, let's say, non-commercial way, though I don't think that's the ideal term, which is that for me, when I was a reader of Cahiers du Cinéma, and now that I'm a writer for Cahiers du Cinéma, it's really not about telling people what to go see. It's about continuing a conversation. I never read reviews in Cahiers du Cinéma before I saw the film. Of course, if I saw there was a big review and an interview, it would make me want to see the film, both because I figured, oh, it's probably an interesting film, but also because I knew I would then be able to read an interesting text that would continue the conversation. Especially when I lived in Paris, I was quite lonely as a film goer for a lot of the time. I didn't have friends who were into movies the way I did, so I would go alone, and it was really important for me to go home and read and, you know, see how my ideas came up against some other intelligent person's ideas. So I see criticism in a more idealized way, which is as the continuation of a conversation, rather than something that's steering you in a direction or summarizing a movie, or, you know.
Are you good with deadlines? I mean, do you write in French?
So for Cahiers du Cinéma, I write in French, and I write also for some American publications in English. I write in both languages.
Are you good with deadlines? You know, or you're this kind of person that, you know, skips all the deadlines?
No, I'm not that kind of person. I wouldn't get anything done in my life if I didn't have deadlines. I wouldn't have written anything in my life if I didn't have deadlines. So I'm very happy about deadlines. I write up to the deadline, and the days before the deadline are horrible because it's just horrible. But I respect my deadlines, and I don't think I've missed a couple deadlines by a couple days, but with huge apologies and tears, and, well, not tears, but yeah, I'm good with my deadlines. And I'm never gonna feel bad about anything with deadlines again, because I recently heard a story about a guy who had to write an article for a book, and he was so late that the whole book got canceled.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, so I feel like anything I do in the future, like I can never do anything as bad as that. So-
Okay, cool. And I know that you skip on a lot of what we call important films. Like you didn't see Roma, you told me that.
Yeah.
So how do you choose what to see? Because Roma is not that formulaic. It's
I know.
not that, you know. So how do you choose what to see?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
it's a
what to watch?
combination of desire and pragmatism. You know,
Okay.
like Roma, I knew I wasn't going to write about it. It was at Venice. I didn't go to Venice. My colleagues went to Venice. So already I knew that it wasn't something that I had to see for writing, which is, you know, I obviously see like 100 times more films than I actually write about. But so there wasn't an immediate absolute need to see it. And I wasn't that interested. I heard really negative things from people that I respect, and there's so many movies to see, you know. And now that I'm a programmer for Locarno, because I only started basically in December, the movies that I see that are outside Locarno, it's like really limited because I have to see so many films from Locarno. But that, you know, that was last fall, the Roma case. It just didn't line up. You know, like I think I wasn't free the day it screened at New York Film Festival, and it wasn't a priority for me. He's not a director I care about that much.
Okay.
I am kind of auteura still in my thought.
Okay, so you're not a fan of this three Mexican greats? I mean, Iñárritu.
I only named one of them.
Del Toro and Cuarón. I mean, because you can see the you know the how they you know got all these big projects now, because they started with very personal things they did in Spanish in Mexico, and then of course they got lured by the Hollywood to do their films. You know, Cuarón made a Harry Potter movie, and now they're getting all the Oscars, all the awards. So you're not a fan?
Well, I think it's wrong to lump them in together. I mean, there are they have similarities beyond the fact that they're Mexican and they're friends, I think. But I only mentioned Roma and Cuarón.
Okay.
I don't know Guillermo del Toro's work very well. I think Iñárritu is a horrible filmmaker. What I've seen, I mean, I'm remembering offhand 21 Grams, Babel, and The Revenant. I think he's just right. I'm right about these are his
the three
films of his. Yeah, I think he has an extremely simplistic and pretentious vision of the world, and that what he does is incredibly overblown and painful to watch. Like overblown, I'll give you an example of what I mean. Towards the end of The Revenant, there's, you know, like minute 136 of Leonardo DiCaprio, like, and in the background, far in the background of a wide shot, there's an avalanche. Like, why? Like, I you know, it's just like, there's no thought behind that. It's just, for me, it's just showing muscles or maybe even other parts of the male anatomy.
Okay.
I have no interest in what this guy has to offer. Cuarón did Children of Men, right?
Children of Men is a masterpiece for me.
We're
What do you
about
think
to have
about
a disagreement.
Okay, tell me about that. Okay. So
Now,
you think it's too ambitious? I mean, it's an ambitious film. It's an over-ambitious film.
I think it's an incredible spectacle. I saw it very recently and very late. It played at Lincoln Center in New York, so I got to see it on the big screen. And I had been hearing about it for years, you know, like the incredible sequence shot in the car, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So I went to see it. I was very excited to see it because I was hoping to be what I described, deep and entertaining, like that perfect storm. Because I realized, like, if this guy is making Hollywood movies, like, it's obvious that he has the thing. Like, he makes movies that can sweep you along that way. I think it's just I enjoyed watching it. It's incredible technically. You know, he throws you basically into the middle of a war. But I think it's an extremely one-noted and rather superficial film. I don't think it has anything.
It's one-noted. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's
Yeah,
one-noted, but I mean, there are a lot of great one-noted films. And actually, with Iñárritu, you should watch his first film, in Amores Perros.
Yeah, I missed them.
Because
I mean,
this is the best one. I mean, the Babel and 21 Grams, this is like repeating himself. And with The Revenant, of course, he's just making a big Hollywood movie, you know, for Leo DiCaprio to get an Oscar. But okay.
I mean, it's conceptually cool, The Revenant, that he basically made this massive bloated film where people like are probably having their toes chopped off from frostbite just to show one guy like grunting and sweating. Like there's a conceptual experimental thing in the heart of that's kind of cool, but he's not Gus Van Sant. He does something like that and it still has to be like, whoa, you know, the avalanches in the background, the music, I'm just not into it. But you know, I realized talking to you, I'm just very weak on Mexican cinema. Like I've never seen a Carlos Regadas film.
Okay.
And these are not things that I do on purpose. You know, I travel, things line up. And for a long time, until I finally had to give up because now I'm a festival programmer, I really tried to avoid watching movies anywhere but in the movie theater. Like it's over now, but I really believed in this big screen experience. So I would miss movies because I wasn't there when they played. And so then I wasn't going to watch them on my laptop or on my TV.
Okay.
Now that's changed. But that's, you know, no one can see everything. And it's kind of a chance operation how you wind up seeing stuff.
Regadas is really interesting. You should watch him, but maybe you don't like him.
It's on my list. Really,
Okay.
it is. Like,
Okay, let's go to Locarno. 2019, you became the part of the team. You're a selectioner now.
Mhm.
What does it mean for you personally? How does it change your worldview except the thing that you have now, you have to watch the streaming, the links that they sent you, and you have to watch a lot of movies on your laptop.
Yeah, it's I'm still taking it in, but it's a very, 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 very different relationship to moving image, to films. It's on some level, I have to admit, though I'm not proud of it, it's more simplistic, because ultimately you're looking at a film to say yes or no. When I look at a film for Cahiers du Cinéma, or just for myself when I'm sitting in a movie theater, I'm not saying yes or no. I'm trying to understand my experience and understand what the filmmaker is conveying to me, right? And those things are important when I watch for Locarno, but ultimately, because there's so many films, ultimately it's just yes or no. It's really what it is, because the way we work is, we each see a bunch of films, and either we say no straight away, or we pass them on to a colleague for a second look. In some cases, like for films that are very, very highly anticipated, we watch them all together. But mostly it's that. So really, it's a very simple thing of, do I pass it on to the next person? And where it gets more profound and more enjoyable again is once the next person and maybe another person and maybe another person have all seen it, and so it's still in contention, once we have to talk about it together. And especially if I'm the one who really likes a film and the other people are kind of like, I don't know, then I really have to really go deep about what is this film and why do we need it? And then it becomes interesting again, because once we've chosen the film, you talk to the filmmaker. And so that's the huge difference, is that as a critic, of course I know filmmakers because I interview filmmakers, I go to the same movies as the filmmakers, but ultimately, as a critic, I do try to operate in a vacuum. I mean, I try not to be cruel. I do remember that there are human beings behind these films, so I don't really like writing negative reviews, and I've managed to avoid it mostly, luckily.
I'm going to ask you later about the most negative review you wrote.
Okay, I'll try to keep that in the back of my mind. It was about Asghar Farhadi, but anyhow, we can get back to that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But anyhow...
which one? No, we should talk about this now.
We're getting off track.
Yeah, we should talk about this now. Which one?
The last one is a total joke.
Yeah, it's a joke.
The one with Penelope Cruz and Javier Bardem.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible.
So that conversation ended quickly.
Yeah,
we're not
it's terrible.
Deny.
Sorry. You were talking...
Yeah, the relationship to the filmmaker. When you're a critic, you don't really think about that. You try to be sensitive because people have put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it, but you don't deal with them. When you're a programmer, wow, very quickly you're dealing directly with directors. There are a lot of go-betweens, there's sales agents, there's producers, there's distributors, but a lot of directors, especially the young ones who are starting out, are writing to you directly and saying, can you please look at my film? And it's very hard because we really, officially I watched 350 films for Locarno. That's what it says on my database that Locarno has. I think I watched many more, but that's a lot of movies, and basically in 3 months.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. But I have found potentially the most satisfying part of my job to date as a programmer for Locarno Film Festival is in writing sensitive, thoughtful construction rejection letters to filmmakers, telling them that we're not going to take their film and humbly explaining why. And I think that I have done it well because the responses that I'm getting from filmmakers are appreciative and real conversations are starting.
350 rejection letters?
No. I'm talking about the filmmakers who I met or who approached me directly, or who I know.
Okay.
Otherwise, you have to realize a lot of these films that I'm talking about were submitted to Locarno blindly. They're on a database online that we each are assigned a number of films and we watch them. And there are a lot of people who do not do their homework regarding festivals. We get a lot of submissions that just are very obviously, regardless of their actual intrinsic quality, not qualified for the Locarno Film Festival. I watched TV documentaries, animated films. We could potentially have an animated film if it was, anime or when Richard Linklater made Waking Life or, whatever. But these are just straight up, very normal cartoons for children. Why are you spending 160 Swiss francs to submit your film to a festival that just doesn't show this kind of work? So I'm not going to write those people notes. I'm talking about the people that I have direct relationships with. It's not anywhere close to 350. And the ones that are really long and thoughtful are even much less than that. It's when I've really somehow started a dialogue with a filmmaker, and I see, and I feel I have something to say about the film. There's also some films, like the worst cases are you just watch a film and you're like, it's a fine film, but we're not going to screen it. Like it doesn't just, you know, we all have a lot of films like that in our lives, right? That are just fine, but they don't. What's much more easy is when the film is really bad, or when the film is really good, or when the film has really great potential, but you can see what's limiting it. And then you can say, humbly, again, because I'm not into this idea that programmers are directing what films should be. I'm not telling you like
this and that, and then
yeah, that's not my thing. That really freaks me out. I mean, it's a nuance.
Cannes Film Festival do that.
I think a lot of festivals do it, but definitely Cannes does it.
Yeah.
But I should add though that because these relationships develop, and programmers in an ideal situation are people who are knowledgeable lovers of film, trust develops. And so on the one hand, it's gross if you think that a programmer is saying to a filmmaker, yeah, we'll show your film if you cut off 20 minutes. But if a filmmaker is early in the process, because we see a lot of unfinished films, right? And sometimes films that aren't even out of the editing room completely, we're seeing rough cuts. Why wouldn't it be useful for you to say, you know, I really don't understand this scene, or this secondary character is really strong. Do you have anything more? You know, just people have test screenings all the time. So I don't want to be too dogmatic about these rules, but I feel like we've gone a very long way from whatever your question was.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I think it's really interesting. But what kind of films get the yes? And because when we think about Locarno, we perceive it as like more arty, more experimental film festival.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of film gets a yes?
So I think the beauty of Locarno is that I can't answer that question.
Okay.
Is that it's not a formulaic festival.
Okay, but for you,
yeah, sure.
What do you look for?
What I tell people when I turn down films and I don't have that much to say, like when I'm talking to a sales agent, for instance, is that I feel the film doesn't have the directorial vision that I look for in a film. I mean, I'm looking for an artist. I want to see someone who has a singular perspective on the world, expressing it through a singular approach to the art of film. You know, that's like an ideal test tube description of what am I looking for. But I want to point out that that's a very, very, very wide spectrum, right? Because you can have someone that's actually making a Hollywood film in that way, and you can have someone that's making a film in a basement with a 16mm camera that she built herself, you know? It's so, Locarno is very diverse, and we have an experimental section. I wouldn't say that our competition we have 3 competitive sections. International competition, so that's, you know, the more or less established filmmakers, big movies, whatever. I mean, big in the art world, in the art right. sense. GDP, which is for emerging directors, first, second, third features, and then Moving Ahead, which is very free. It's short films, features, basically experimental. So we have that, but I wouldn't like us to have the tag experimental, because you can go to Locarno and see a movie that will make you have the experience that you want to have on a Friday evening when you're going on a date or something. You know, it's really a diverse festival, I think.
What names do you hunt for? Because when we think about Cannes or Venice, we know like if Almodovar has a new film, then it's going to wind up in Cannes, or Ken Loach, or I don't know, you know, all these guys, Lars von Trier. And do you have these names on your list? Like this is Locarno guys or girls directors?
Sure. I mean, we don't have too many directors that are just ours, because Cannes is the top, so they can have whatever they want. And Venice is also in a very powerful position, but we have to share a little bit with Venice, though there are things that we definitely take that Venice would never take, and vice versa. Now with Berlin, because the old Locarno team has moved to Berlin, and they're a group of programmers who have incredible taste and incredible history and incredible networks. So already we're seeing that there's going to be some negotiation there. But, you know, if you tell me like Locarno filmmakers like Pedro Costa, Hong Sang-soo, Lav Diaz, Chantal Ackerman showed her last film there, though she's, you know, beyond everything because she's one of the greatest film artists. But I saw her last film there. Bigan was discovered there. Ryusuke Hamaguchi, that was his fifth film, Happy Hour, aka Senses. That was really a discovery of Locarno. So these are the kind of caliber of filmmakers that I would like to think about for Locarno. But also, we're a festival of discoveries, and we can have discoveries in competition, international competition. Our program isn't being announced until Wednesday, so I won't talk about names, but...
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the newest edition, what it's going to bring, but you cannot talk about that.
I can't really tell you names, but what I can tell you, something that I'm very proud of, is that offhand, I think we have at least 3 first features in international competition. Definitely, I know there's two first fiction features and a first documentary feature, and I might even be forgetting some. So I think that's really, really cool. That, we have a section for emerging talents, but then we also, if a film really blows us away, or we feel that a film is ready to be on the biggest stage, we can put it, and that's pretty rare. I mean, Cannes did it this year. They had Mati Diop,
Right.
Atlantique in competition.
And she got Grand Prix, right.
Yeah, I mean, Frémaux was being very smart because he had to deal with a new director at Directors Fortnight, and so to make sure that his power still remained very clear, he took a lot of Directors Fortnight type of titles and put them in Un Certain Regard and even in competition to kind of like lay down the law. Whereas in previous years, he was much more conservative in his sections.
Yeah, and he was criticized for that. He was criticized for that, and now he evolves. And that's why I admire him. He might be a devil or an angel, but he's
He's a strategist.
doing his homework. He's doing his homework.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to get into a discussion.
Yeah,
about James Frémaux.
sure. I'm sorry. But
No, I'm not upset. I'm not upset. I'm not going to go on and on.
yeah,
about
sure.
it.
And last year in Locarno, films from Singapore won. It was A Land Imagined.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly the name of the
I have to
filmmaker.
admit, I don't either.
Yeah, but the thing was that Netflix acquired that, purchased it, and now it has the biggest audience it can have. I mean, if you're interested in a film
Sure.
from Singapore,
Sure.
but as far as I understand, it means that it doesn't have a cinema. You cannot see it in a cinema. You don't have the cinema experience. So, what's your take on that as a person who prefers the cinema experience when you have the winner of such a prestigious film festival, and then the only way to see it in Netflix, which has like 100 titles every month, not every month, but every 3 months.
Well, it's a really complicated question that we started touching on earlier, and I think we have to be pragmatic because we're in a period where there's this thing, the festival film, right? Where there's all these films. There's so many films. I saw 350 films for Locarno this year. That's just me. So that means in all there were about 1,000 features presented to us. There's all these films that never come out, that no one sees but us, the people at the festivals, And so that's a problem because film starts to be on this course of elitism where it's going to wind up that everything but Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and X-Men is like going to the opera, So in that sense, I'm not happy about it because it's not how I like to watch moving image. I think that if Netflix wants to distribute or to make A Land Imagined and films like that available on its platform, it's great. I do think that the thing that remains to be negotiated and fought over is, this kind of absurd thing that Netflix demands of films is that they can't have a theatrical release if they're going to be on their platform. I mean, the thing is like a movie like A Land Imagined would come out in Paris,
Right.
maybe New York. I don't even know where else. Like, a few other cities. The vast majority of people who are going to watch this movie now on Netflix are going to be in the woods somewhere, or that freedom that you don't have to be as attached to big cities is a good thing with Netflix. But they should allow both experiences because still, I think a lot of filmmakers are making films with this in mind, and they should be allowed to have that experience. And we should be allowed to have that experience if we want to go to the trouble of having it. When I started going to the movies, I had the option between VHS and movie theaters. And I went to great lengths to see movies on the big screen. Like I traveled from Luxembourg to Paris when I could to see the Cassavetes films, to see the Philippe Garrel films, like because I couldn't see them otherwise. And of course, that there's a level of privilege built into that because I could buy my train ticket, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just saying, like, there's room for a lot of different ways to see images right now. I find that prescriptive approaches are dumb.
Okay, we're gonna move to the questions of the audience, but I'm gonna ask the question they're gonna ask. Is what did you know about Ukrainian cinema before coming to Odessa and becoming a member of the jury of the national competition? Tell about that.
Well, what I know most is the incredible history. I know the heritage, you know.
Okay.
Obviously, I know Dovchenko. It's really amazing for me to be in the city where parts of The Man with a Movie Camera was filmed, and also where Kira Muratova worked. Like, to be in the city where The Asthenic Syndrome was filmed is really incredible, because all those, like, Dovchenko's Earth, Man with a Movie Camera, Asthenic Syndrome are all incredibly powerful experiences for me of sitting in a cinema and having my idea of what can happen on a screen transformed. So to be in the place where those things either happened or came from tangentially is incredible. And it's strange because somehow I have to admit I didn't realize that Odessa was such an important hub of cinema history, and I should add Parajanov into that because I know he was here. Right. So, you know, it's just like those four names alone, like, wow, like this is a capital of cinema. And somehow I didn't quite put that together. So belated apologies to the great history makers of Ukrainian cinema. I recognize that now. I have to admit that I'm also not super up to date on contemporary Ukrainian cinema. Of course, I know Sergei Losnitsa. I know his documentary work better than his fiction work.
And you watch Atlantis by Vasinovich.
Yeah, I was very impressed with Atlantis.
Okay, it's gonna come up. We're not gonna say where because it's kind of a secret. Yeah. But yeah, so what do you think about that? I mean, just watching a film from a contemporary Ukrainian filmmaker that's just 2019. What do you think? What do you think? Where is going?
Well, the thing that was very impressive about Atlantis is that I think a lot of what gets to people in New York, in the West, of Ukrainian cinema now is, of course, and unfortunately, to do with the war, the aftermath of the war, the political situation here. So if someone said to me 6 months ago, Ukrainian cinema, I'm going to think about something very heavy. And I'm probably going to think about something that is quite like Atlantis, formally, you know, sequence shots, very carefully and beautifully composed and controlled. Somehow Atlantis does that kind of film, which I'm a little bit sick of, superbly. I can't really tell you why, because I watched it now a few months ago and I had to watch it in a hurry to make a decision about something, but it's like, it's the home run of that kind of film. It makes sense, it has a trajectory, it has an arrival point, it's really visually incredible. So that's, I think, a great film. I do want to say also that I saw ahead of time a film that I'm going to see in competition here. I wrote down the title because I'm bad with titles. My Thoughts Are Silent by Antonio Lukic.
Yeah,
film.
Yeah, it got the special prize in Karlovy Vary Film Festival.
Yeah,
right?
So that film was a really nice surprise because, again, I have this very stereotypical vision of Ukrainian cinema, whether it's fiction or documentary, because of what filters through to festivals in the West, where, you know, there is this desire to kind of like make a political statement or bear witness to something.
Yeah, it's too heavy. You know,
exactly, crushing. And this film has a lightness while being, I think, really engaged with the reality of this country today. And so that was really interesting to see. I love it when a film cracks open my idea of what's going on in a certain cinema territory. So that was really cool. But we've kind of now done the full tour of what I know of Ukrainian cinema, so I'm pretty excited to learn more this week.
Okay, guys, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and get the mic. Okay, yep. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Marina. I'm actress and TV director, and I'm wondering. I wrote that you directed the 3 short film, right? So, what was the experience for you? Was it actually successful in the festival? And is it was just to try yourself as a director? Do you have really ambitions? Because sometimes people say many critics they just wanted to be a director. But so, can you share that?
Sure. So I would say they were mildly successful.
What do you mean by mildly?
I'll tell you in detail in a second. So I don't have ambitions to make films. I did a long time ago. So I should say I made 3 short films, and 2 of them I made. I think the first one I think I shot it in 2000, and the second one I shot in 2001. And those films, by mildly successful, I meant they went to Rotterdam, which at the time was really cool for me. They went to a few other festivals in the US, but they didn't really create any momentum. I also didn't know how to create momentum. Like, I went to Rotterdam and was terrified of everyone and didn't talk to anyone. And I just wanted to make films, and I was very naive, and I thought that, if I made a good film, like, suddenly my whole life would make sense and I would just make films forever. So let's be honest, I was pretty stupid, but I was really young. And then I made those 2 films, and I just didn't have another film that I wanted to make. There wasn't another film that I wanted to make. I moved to New York, I made theater, I became a critic, and then I think it was in 2013, I made a 3rd film. And that was a really amazing experience because it was kind of a time of transition in my life. A lot of things were changing, a lot was going on, and I suddenly had this really strong urge to make a particular film with a particular actress, and I realized, because I had been making theater in New York for a few years and getting involved in cinema through my work as a critic, I knew everyone I needed to make a film. Like, I knew an amazing cinematographer, I knew actors, I had everything. And we made this film very fast, and unlike my other experiences of making films where I felt totally lost on set and actually felt horrible, I felt very calm. And I mean, the film definitely has flaws, but the experience of making it, I really felt like I knew what was going on, and it was very powerful. And then that film got rejected by a lot of film festivals, including Locarno. And
So you know how it feels.
I do know how it
Did you
feels.
get, like a big, nice rejection letter?
Not so much. From Locarno, yes, because I knew one person at Locarno, and so she was nice. But then the film got into New Directors, New Films, which is a festival in New York between Museum of Modern Art and Lincoln Center, which are basically the 2 places where I spend my life. And everyone that I know came and saw the films, and it was just from a human perspective, no business like that. Nothing happened from making these screenings, but from the conclusion of an experience, it was beautiful. And now there's no film that I want to make. Like, I'd be very excited if in 6 months or 10 years I want to make another film, and I do, but I'm really not I've not been good at doing career plans and life plans. So, these films happened, who knows what'll happen next. I don't know of a lot of programmers who became filmmakers after. I think we're probably weird with each other if we feel like we want something other than what we are. So let's see what happens.
Okay, thank you. Do you have another one? Yes, please. Okay.
Hello. Actually, you have mentioned that you're happy to work, especially in Locarno, compared to Sundance, for instance. Can you explain and say more, how your festival differs from others, especially European festival?
Okay, that's a very important and quite hard question. I would say, so Locarno is a Class A festival, so world premieres and international premieres, which means that it has a very good level of press coverage, and so it's very prestigious, and you can really launch a film from Locarno, so that's important. But within that category of festivals, which is Cannes, Berlin, Venice, etc., Rotterdam, I guess, Locarno. I think Locarno is really great because we're not too worried about the red carpet. Venice and Cannes certainly really need to have their films with stars. It's important for us too, but it's also a little bit segregated because Locarno has this thing called Piazza Grande, which is that every night on the central square of Locarno, which is an Italian-style town in Switzerland, in Italian Switzerland, Ticino, sorry. We do an outdoor screening, a little bit like the Odessa Steps. Our audience is 8,000 people. It's really huge. And so those are like a little bit more mainstream audience-friendly movies, and it is important to have a few movie stars for that. But for our competition and for moving ahead and for the emerging, it doesn't really matter so much. And so I think that what distinguishes Locarno is that we have more freedom in what we select, and so we can be more daring. I like to think that we can be really daring and that we can really try to push the definition of what deserves a wide audience. That's the best answer I can give you, I think.
Okay, we have time just for the last question, and you can ask something practical, maybe get a contact, say you have a film, like that. Okay, you want to ask another one? You want to? No, no. There is a woman.
You can ask me in the hall
in the last row.
We have two films which are almost ready.
Okay, just get a mic, please.
We have two films which are almost ready. One is about how far you can go for your love, a dream you have in life, and it's about a man who organized Euromaidan in Crimea, coincidentally, and his wife is Crimean Tatar. And second film is about Crimean Tatar grandfather who travels to see his grandchildren and have lots of fun with them. Do you think we have a chance with this kind of angle?
The pitch, is it enough for you to get it into the competition?
So it's certainly not enough for me to get it into anything, but the point that I want to make, I think in general when I'm talking about Locarno being an open festival, is that all that matters is what the film actually is, you know?
Yeah.
Like you could tell me any pitch and I would say, show me the movie. Like, I don't think there's anything you could tell me unless you told me that, you know, your film was about like supporting hate crimes, that I would say, no, it's not for us. Like, it could be anything if there's a group of filmmakers or a filmmaker who's somehow doing something distinctive. The thing that I would say to you is that your timing in terms of Locarno is very bad because, you know, the festival is happening, or maybe you don't know, so let me just say, oh, sorry. The festival, we closed our program 2 weeks ago, and the festival will be from August 7th to August 17th. So in terms for you of getting your films out into the world, you would have to wait a whole year. And most producers, you know, will have a schedule. Like, I would assume that you would go to Berlin before you would go to Locarno, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no reason that we wouldn't consider your films if they didn't screen somewhere else before and that they wouldn't have a chance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, one round of applause to Nicolas, Elliott, the selectioner of Locarno Film Festival, the critic to Ukrainian Cinema, and the member of the jury for the national competition. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure was mutual.
Okay.